I guess we all know that accepting payment is always part of a wider overall customer journey. And so they always need to be tightly integrated with other systems and processes, which I think is why we're starting to see more and more examples of embedded payments. And embedded finance takes this beyond payments to other banking services as well. But what does that really mean for all of us? Is it going to be the next big thing? And if so, how's it going to impact banks, merchants and consumers? Let's find out in this episode of Navigating Digital Payments.
Welcome to the Navigating Digital Payments podcast, brought to you by Worldline, bringing you the latest innovations, trends and predictions about the future of payments.
Hello and welcome to this episode of the Navigating Digital Payments podcast. I'm David Daly. I look after the Discovery Hub at Worldline, and I'm really delighted today to be joined by two great guests. We have Panayotis Kriaris, who is the Head of Business Development at Unza. Panayotis, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for the invitation. Very nice being here. Thank you.
And we also have regular guest, in fact, practically co-host of the podcast, Ina Kostiuk, who is the Global Partner Manager for the Merchant Services part of the Worldline business. Hi, Ina. Great to have you back again.
Hello, everybody. Yes, my pleasure. It's always up for an interesting debate.
So later, I really want to get your view on whether embedded finance is really going to be this next big thing. But first, I think it's worth us trying to just be really clear and clarify what we mean by embedded finance, understand a little bit about what's happening in the area now, and also maybe understand what some of the challenges are. So, Panayotis, maybe first I can come to you. Could you start by setting out in really simple, easy to understand terms what people mean when they talk about embedded finance?
I think in a sentence that's very simple for everyone to understand. So actually it's about embedding financial services or incorporating financial services into non-financial services offerings. As simple as that. I mean, the term is relatively new, but the model as such, I think, it has been around for decades, and we can think about store and branded credit cards. I mean, I think we all have experience from retailers, big ones, from airlines. The difference though is that in these cases, we used to have these traditional financial products that were offered through either alternative channels or with a different branding, but not with this embedded concept. So today, I think what we are living is and actually that's for me a game changer, is the ability to directly integrate these financial processes and offerings into any non-finance environment via APIs, and actually they become part of the offering itself. So you cannot really differentiate between the two. I mean, during the checkout process, and that's, I think, the key difference here. So the digitization has changed things, and for me this is the key difference.
Yeah, it's clear that enhanced technology help to make smooth for a customer experience, and of course improve the business opportunities. But we also hear a lot about BaaS, like banking as a service. And what are the similarity or differences between the BaaS and embedded finance for you?
That's actually a very good question, because I get to hear this a lot, and I think in the mind of many people it's not clear enough. So when we say BaaS, which is actually a term that means banking as a service and embedded finance, for me these are the two sides of the same coin. And even though they're used most of the times interchangeably, they are not the same thing. So I think you can imagine the difference being that BaaS is the bottom, the infrastructure layer that feeds into the outcome, which is the embedded finance. So this is the front end, right? So you can imagine that you have, let's say, in many cases, you can have different layers all the way. But one is the bottom, as I said before, and the other one is the outcome. So the BaaS, in most of the cases, is the enabler of what we see as clients, as consumers, as businesses. And maybe if I go back to the definition that we discussed and what you have mentioned, Ina, for me it would be also interesting to clarify that I think if I would have to rank why we have been, what is the change that we have been seeing so far, I would see very roughly four things. So the first one is digitization, which has been changing the consumer and the customer preferences. So we are all used to these seamless customer journeys that we know from the big techs, right? So that's one. The second one is what I would call the unbundling of financial services brought about by technology. So we don't have one, let's say, provider offering everything on a vertical basis, but we do have different niches and different providers. Then we have the decoupling of the customer experience, as I call it, from the infrastructure as a result of the use of APIs plus of the cloud. And then we also have the platform model, which for me is the dominant business model of the open economy. Sorry. So if you put all these things together, I think you come to the rise of what we call embedded finance, which is not to be mixed with banking as a service, as we explained before.
I guess there you've talked a bit about what we mean by embedded finance, and also, I suppose, some of the building blocks in the ecosystem. I'm interested to know, Panagiotis, have you got some interesting or surprising cases where you've seen embedded finance being used?
I would say many, and most of the times we probably don't realize that these are use cases that we call now in theory embedded finance, but if I go on and mention some of them, I think that everybody will resonate with those. So the first one is probably taxes integrating payments. I guess we all have once you call your taxi through the app, there is a payment happening immediately at the background, which is integrated into the checkout process. So you don't even realize that this is happening. So you get on the taxi and then you get off the taxi, you don't have to do anything. And everything is happening at the background. So that's probably the most common use case that we all know. Then we for example have what we call buy now pay later. I mean, which has been very popular over the past years. Has been in a way redefining e-commerce and fintech, right? And this is nothing more than embedded finance at checkout, installment or invoice, right? So I mean, we all know many providers who are now offering this kind of offerings. Then I would mention, for example, even SMEs getting financing from their payments provider, which is happening today, or invoice financing in B2B marketplaces, for example, or e-commerce platforms like Shopify offering merchant accounts, or insurance, for example, which is a very big use case for me. So both on the contextual acquisition basis, so imagine that when I buy something, it used to be the case that insurance would come after. Now with embedded finance, you have it at the same time, and this has been always the big problem of insurance, because there was a decoupling of the insurance offering from the underlying product. But now, if you have it during the same checkout process, on the one hand side, you have this contextual acquisition basis, so you can increase sales. And on the other hand side, you're also solving many operational problems. So for example, to manage the insurance options, the policy claims, or the process payments. And probably the last one, I'm not sure. I think that I'm not sure if we have it in Europe. I haven't seen it, but for example, in the US, with Google Maps, you can also find participating street parking near the destination and pay for it within the app using Google Pay. So that's another example of embedded finance. So I think all these use cases are highlighting how much embedded finance is in our day-to-day, both on the B2C and the B2B side, and I think this is increasingly becoming a reality.
And if I can add, for the insurance business, that it's been always quite expensive area of the business, and to focus to reduce costs been there for a while, and with embedded finance, it's actually much easier to do. And now to not offer even some smaller insurance for a low low value ticket also possible. And we already see that at least in Amazon, they do it. I am not sure also many platforms in Europe, but it's also quite some cases in the US at least.
I mean, if we would have to, let's say, categorize in 4 or 5 very broad domains the use cases, I would say payments is probably the first one and probably the most mature one. And then you have insurance, you have lending, you have banking, and also there is a very big segment that I would call wealth management, which is in terms of potential, it's not that broad as the other ones and not as mature, but I think it's something that we need to mention.
And what I thought was interesting listening to your answer there is that a big part of it seems to me about how integrated it is into the overall customer journey. And I say that because I think lots of it is not new individually. So you've always been able to get finance to buy things. But I remember once doing this for a phone, and really I had a checkout process for the phone and then a totally different process that took a few days to set up the finance around it. So it really felt very, very standalone and not integrated at all. And that, of course, is completely different to now the kind of BNPL experience where it's taking seconds and it's fully integrated with the checkout process.
For me, there is a rule that says, the more difficult it is to understand what's behind, the better the integration is and the better the whole process it is, right? I mean, if you are not even feeling what's sitting behind, if you're not even in the position to understand how the 2 or 3 or more offerings differentiate between each other, then I would say that this is for me the key of success. And this is what we would call seamless integration, which has become kind of a buzzword lately.
Coming back to your taxi example, I noticed with Uber you can tip the driver now after you've had a taxi ride. And what's interesting there is it's as part of the review process. So you give them a star rating and you can leave some feedback, and then it asks if you want to tip them. And I do wonder psychologically, if you've just given someone 5 stars and said they were very friendly, maybe you feel more like you should give them a tip than if you just had something flashing up saying, would you like to give me a tip? I don't know, of course, but what I do notice is it does not feel like a separate payment action at all. It feels like pushing a button. I think they even give predefined amounts and then the tip is made, and it's...
I mean, the tipping is again part of the process, right? So that's again the secret. So if you are happy with the driver, if you are happy with the ride, if they, for example, made an extra effort to get you to the destination because you had, you had a meeting and you were late, for example, this kind of stuff, right? So it's part of the natural process and of the taxi of the ride, and that's here the secret.
And Ina, maybe if I can come to you, what are you seeing related to embedded finance with our merchant customers? And are you seeing them are they understanding this? Are they having challenges? What are they? What's their kind of approach or the reaction being to this?
Well, our merchants maybe don't call it and don't crave necessary for embedded finance, but what they really focus on is to first keep the existing client base and have a new clients with a very low cost. So the customer centricity is always one of the elements which is driving the decision making. And if the integrated payment or other financial services are integrated within their offer, they're definitely much more interested to have it because it's increase their revenues. The retention rate will stay quite high, and have a more added value services for their users or merchant or clients. And what we see as well that there are more and more businesses like merchants aim to have one device, one option to serve their clients. So now when you go to a restaurant, you can see sometimes that waiter has on hand one tablet already kind of attached to the hand. It's an Android device where they would be asking you order, where they put order, where they add orders, where they serve several tables like this. and in the end, you can pay through that tablet. So it's very seamless payment process already integrated with the third-party applications through the API, where you don't need to run between different devices. You don't need to search for point of sales. It's just like as soon as you get your waiter or even any other waiter, they can just put number of your table and get immediately your bill or ask to send it to you via email and allow you to pay. So such things we see more and more in the market, and merchant wish it to have it.
So we've talked a bit there about the merchant side. Panagiotis, maybe you could comment on what this is meaning for banks. I'm trying to figure out really whether this is a threat for them or an opportunity.
For me, embedded finance is probably one of the best chances that banks have today to adapt to the new landscape. I mean, not only to adapt, but also to thrive and to succeed. And I think we have to put this in a context to begin with. And we need to understand that the competitive landscape of today is very, very different to what it used to be, let's say, 10 or 15 years ago. So instead of having only banks, so on a vertical kind of business model, owning the entire value chain, what do you have today? You have different players spread among a multitude of layers. And they are competing in one or more of these by assuming multiple roles. So, and you also have what I mentioned before, this new distribution model, which we call platform economics. So if you put all these things together, you have a disruption which is taking place, and it's cutting actually through all the key elements of finance, as we used to know. So it's influencing the mechanics, it's influencing the operations, the monetization, the distribution, everything. So, and that's why I'm saying that for me, embedded finance, even though banks have to make an effort and understand what exactly this is and how it can be adding value to their business model, but they have a few options. And they have a few options to differentiate what they do in this value chain. I mean, there is a very interesting number coming from InnoPay that embedded finance, it's probably going to make up to 30% of bank revenues by 2030. So imagine if you have somebody who is not actively pursuing this new business model, I think there is a high risk of them being left behind. So if I can summarize the roles that were, let's say, that embedded finance is kind of providing as an opportunity for banks, I would say that first of all is the platform model that I mentioned before, so they can actually own the delivery channels without necessarily owning all the services in-house, but rather aggregating or embedding them from third parties like fintechs. And this actually is a model that could fit players of different sizes and sophistication levels. So for example, it can fit the larger incumbents that have the resources and the customer base to build an ecosystem around them, or also even small challengers that they want to grow and cannot afford to develop all the offerings in-house. So that's one. Now on the flip side, you can also have traditional banks looking for differentiation, and they could use the banking as a service, so they can leverage their banking license. At the end of the day, banking as a service has two main elements. One is the licensing, and the other one is the infrastructure. So, and given that in many cases you have incumbents that run on outdated technology stacks, they could, and I've seen this happening on the market, actually across many markets, they could partner with a technology provider, and in this case they would bridge the licensing piece with the infrastructure effectively. So this is what we call fronting, for example. And then of course you have more advanced players. They can leverage this, what we call this full stack BaaS model, the banking as a service, and they can build both on the licensing and on the technology side, right? And they can offer end-to-end vertical integrated models with a high degree of customization, right? So we've been seeing all these things and new models on the market. And again, I think for me that's a huge opportunity for banks. And had it not been for embedded finance, I think they would have to somehow invent it as an opportunity.
And I wonder, because I think we've talked a lot about the positive aspects of embedded finance. So partly the fact that it really makes it a more integrated, seamless experience for the consumer. For merchants, I guess it can boost conversions by offering loans at the point of sale, but also gives them a chance to upsell things like insurance, as Ina was mentioning. And as you said there, Panagiotis, for the banks, it's kind of providing an opportunity, I guess, to extend the reach of the products and services they offer. But are there some downsides? Are there some challenges around embedded finance?
For sure. I mean, I think, it always has to do with how you implement something, right? And then you have to take into account that this is something that not everybody knows very well what it means and what it does. So for me, the first, if I would have to name a couple of things, I would start with, so imagine that, you have a model, it has become kind of a buzzword today, so everybody's talking about embedded finance, even though many do not necessarily understand what it means and what it takes behind to build one. So I think the first challenge for me is not having the right strategy in place, which is aligned exactly with the embedded finance. So you need to understand why you're doing this, what the model means for you, what role exactly you want to play, why it makes sense, and how you're going to monetize. So it's not that let's go and do it, but you have to do your homework behind in advance. So that's the first challenge for me. It's not always a given. Now, the second one is what we mentioned before, which is very, very crucial, and it has with this seamless integration in the end-to-end flow, which is not always, again, something that it goes without saying, right? So you have to integrate the embedded finance offerings that are a fit for you in a way that is not causing friction and without disrupting the existing flow that you have, right? So you might have a competitive advantage, for example, in terms of having a very good operational setup, in terms of having a very quick end-to-end checkout process. But imagine if you embed, let's say, offerings in the wrong way, and you disrupt in a negative way your competitive edges, then you are actually having the opposite result of what you are targeting. So that's the second one. And maybe the third one, which is also very important, is how do you manage trust from an end customer perspective? Because here, as we said, we are dealing with selling products that go beyond what is my core competence as a business. So if I'm selling, books, how do I convince somebody who is my customer that actually I'm competent enough, I have the capabilities, it's not a fraud to sell something that is going far beyond what they would see as my core business, right? So there is a bit of an education to be done with your end clients, with your providers, right? So these are things that you need to take into account. So I would not necessarily say that these are negative sides, but these are challenges. And as always, as in every aspect, in everything that we do, we need to take into consideration how we best manage to address these challenges.
That's really interesting, Panagiotis. So in a moment, I'd like to finish off by getting your view on how embedded finance is going to evolve into the future and whether you think it is going to be the next big thing. But before we come on to that, I just want to remind people that if you want to get in touch with us to propose new topics for future podcasts, or if you have any questions, then you can email in by writing to ndp-podcast@worldline.com. And also a reminder, please, if you haven't already done so, please take a moment to subscribe to the podcast, then you'll never miss an episode. And also please leave us a rating and a review. So coming back to that main question then, Panagiotis, do you think embedded finance is going to be the next big thing? And if so, over what kind of timeline? What changes are we going to see?
I think we already see, we have been discussing a lot about the use cases, about the examples, about why this can make a difference. So I think we already see a certain level of disruption caused by embedded finance, and I think that's only going to continue. And if you ask me, there is one simple reason why I think embedded finance will come to dominate all the more our business and consumer lives. And I think it's about taking decisions. And imagine it used to be the case that we would take a decision, so you would probably go to a bank when it comes to a financial offering. But what we increasingly see is that we have customers taking decisions, finance decisions in non-financial contexts, right? And in this case, you have embedded finance becoming in many cases a mainstream offering. So this is for me the big game changer. This is changing everything, right? And that's why I think this is also connected to the fact that we are seeing these typical and traditional business and industry boundaries disappearing very fast, right? You don't know who is actually doing what. So you have, let's say, e-commerce players offering financial services. You have banks going the other way, becoming technology companies. So you have a mix of things. So I would say that the playing field is changing, the roles are changing, and that's why for me this embedded finance is a big thing. And despite all what we have seen so far in terms of evolution, I think we've just started scratching the surface of the potential of embedded finance. So I think we're going to see more use cases. I think we're going to see a plethora of industries such as retail, and e-commerce. I mean, we've seen, but we're going to see more. But you're also going to see more non-traditional, from an expectation point of view, industries that will be joining the game. I can imagine healthcare. I can imagine the auto industry. I can imagine travel, hospitality, of course, platforms and marketplaces. So we're going to see more of this happening. So I'm confident that this will be becoming a large part of business.
And from the merchant perspective, we do see that as they wish to have all simplicity and it's already integrated to the platform where they work, that's why the marketplaces are their number one demand, because they usually offer that simplicity of integration. They usually already offer at least embedded payment. Some of them started to look into other services under embedded finance as well. And as mentioned, the number one demand is B2B lending. So it's really for micro merchant or for SMBs space. And that's why they're all looking into the best platform to work with, and of course to have a global footprint as well.
Yeah, I mean, Ina, what you mentioned is very spot on. I think it has a name as well. So you have a model which is called revenue-based financing. So it's financing coming immediately from the providers, let's say payment providers or PSPs of the merchants, actually coming directly from them. And you have a model whereby they receive directly. First of all, you have the credit scoring done based on data that they have in place. So in many cases, banks, for example, they don't have this kind of data. And on the other hand, they can also directly provide very fast disbursements connected to the volumes they do. So there is a very seamless experience. They get their money very, very quickly, and they grow the business together with the financing. So actually the financing is being adjusted to their needs.
So to me, it's been a really interesting and quite wide-ranging discussion again. I mean, I think it was useful, Panagiotis, at the start that you set out what we mean by embedded finance. So it's really the integration of financial products and services into a vertical where that isn't their core business. I think it was interesting also to differentiate it from banking as a service, where banking as a service is more, I suppose, a back office enabler of this, whereas the embedded finance is what the end user, the consumer, is seeing. It was interesting when you spoke about the use cases. I think most people would realize we've probably all used embedded finance already, whether it's a payment for a taxi or whether it's a split payment at the point of checkout. Interesting, I think, as well, to see that the kind of importance of this for merchants, as discussed by Ina, but also the relevance in the banking world, and also covering some of those challenges. And I think on that topic of it, is it the next big thing? I think what you said, Panagiotis, about we're basically seeing the increasing making of decisions about financial products and services as part of a customer journey that is not directly related. So once upon a time, you might have thought about getting a loan or thought about taking out some insurance as a separate activity, and now that's something that's happening as a tightly integrated part of buying a product or another service. So I think it's interesting to see how that is going to transform the landscape in the coming years. So really want to thank both of you so much for joining the podcast and having this great discussion. Panagiotis, thank you so much to you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
And Ina, of course, always great to have you joining. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was, as always, insightful.
And that just leaves me finally to thank our dear listeners for joining us again for this episode of Navigating Digital Payments.
Thank you for listening to the Navigating Digital Payments podcast, brought to you by Worldline. Join us next time to learn more about the latest innovations, trends, and predictions for the future of payments.